So imagine two houses are on fire.
Right.
One belongs to your family, and the other belongs to, a total stranger you've never met. You only have time to run into one burning building.
Right. So obviously you choose your family's house.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
save your own.
Yeah.
And afterwards, society doesn't just understand your choice. I mean, society literally calls you a hero.
Yeah, we expect that kind of localized loyalty. It's human nature.
Right. But here is the paradox we're tearing apart today in this deep dive. When a nation does the exact same thing
Oh.
on a global scale,
Oh, yeah. That's where the math changes.
right, when a nation prioritizes its own citizens in a burning world and, just leads strangers to the flames, that heroic instinct can very quickly mutate into a staggering atrocity.
It really can. And it's what we call the scale problem.
The scale problem.
Yeah, it is the single most volatile moral shift a human being can navigate. Because, I mean, it cuts straight to the core of how we organize our entire existence. We're dealing with a really intensely powerful psychological structure here.
And navigating that structure is exactly our mission today. If you're listening to this right now, you know the friction we are talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel it, right?
Well, absolutely. Everyone feels it.
You live in this hyper-connected world. You can instantly stream a video from Tokyo or read an op-ed from Nairobi,
Right.
and yet the world feels more fractured, more tribal, and more walled off than ever before.
Yeah, because you're constantly caught between two massive gravitational pulls.
Exactly. On one side, there's this deep primal need to belong to a specific people, like a home base.
And on the other side, you have the demand for universal human dignity.
Right, the idea that a person thousands of miles away who speaks a language you don't even understand has the exact same moral worth as your next-door neighbor.
Which forces us into the central overarching question of all the source material we're looking at today.
Right, a big one.
Is nationalism actually compatible with a genuine respect for all humanity? Like, can you elevate your own people without fundamentally diminishing the humanity of everyone else?
And to even begin answering that, I think we have to look at the dual nature of nationalism. Because depending on the historical moment, the concept wears, two entirely different masks.
Yeah, it really does.
On one hand, it sounds incredibly inspiring, like the language of the underdog.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that inspiration, actually, because for much of modern history, nationalism has been the primary engine for liberation.
Oh, wow. Liberation.
Yeah, it's the mechanism marginalized groups use to declare that they won't be erased. It's the core organizing principle behind anti-colonial struggles.
Right.
Think of a population that has had its language banned, its resources extracted, and, its governance dictated by an empire an ocean away.
Yeah, a completely oppressive situation.
Exactly. Nationalism provides the conceptual framework for them to say, hey, we share a distinct identity, and because of that, we have the right to govern ourselves.
Right, it's a survival tactic. It's basically a group of people drawing a circle around themselves and saying, we matter.
Yes.
And when you frame it as a tool for political self-determination and sheer cultural survival, the concept feels undeniably righteous. I mean, it feels like standing up to a bully.
It does feel that way. But we have to flip the coin because the exact same conceptual framework produces outcomes that are utterly terrifying.
Because the leap from we matter to we matter more than you
is microscopic.
Yeah.
Nationalism is equally responsible for superiority complexes, xenophobia, myths of genetic purity, and just a total moral indifference to anyone living outside the designated border.
I want to pause on that pivot because the mechanism there is super fascinating. Think about a home team dynamic.
But the sports analogy, yeah.
Right. If you're a sports fan, you wear the jersey, you paint your face, you experience this beautiful collective euphoria when your team wins.
And genuine shared agony when they lose?
Exactly. That is a community. It feels warm and safe.
Right.
But there is always a threshold, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
The exact moment cheering for your home team turns into actively trying to injure the visiting players. Or, dehumanizing the opposing fans.
Yeah, when you stop seeing them as people who simply live in a different city and a different roster.
Right. You start seeing them as legitimate enemies.
And that sports analogy highlights something really crucial, which is the emotional intensity involved here.
Right.
But to really dissect this, we need to draw a very hard line between two concepts that get sloppily used as synonyms all the time.
Oh, you mean patriotism and nationalism?
Exactly. We have to separate patriotism from nationalism.
Yes. I really want to drill down into this because the distinction changes the entire conversation.
It does. It fundamentally shifts it.
We hear patriot and nationalist thrown around in political debates as if they're just, varying degrees of the exact same emotion.
Yeah, but they operate on completely different wavelengths. Think of patriotism as primarily an affection.
Like a feeling.
Yeah, it is a profound love, a loyalty, or just a sense of gratitude toward its specific place in its culture. It's an emotional bond.
So you can love the landscape, the food, the idiosyncrasies of your hometown, and feel a deep patriotic attachment.
Right, and it's relatively benign. Nationalism, however, takes that emotional on and weaponizes it into a comprehensive political ideology.
Wait, weaponizes it?
Well, yes. So patriotism is a feeling, but nationalism makes a structural claim.
Oh, okay. So it's a moral framework.
Exactly. It asserts that the nation itself is the highest primary moral and political unit.
Wow.
It demands that the boundaries of the state should perfectly match the boundaries of this shared cultural identity.
Uh-huh.
And more importantly, it demands that your ultimate loyalty belongs to that unit.
I think I need an analogy for that one.
Okay, think about it like this. Patriotism is bringing a pie to the neighborhood block party because you love your neighbors.
Okay, I like pie.
Right. Nationalism is organizing that block into a gated compound, declaring your street legally and morally superior to the next street over, and setting up armed checkpoints.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a massive difference. So it's the difference between saying, I am incredibly proud of who we are, versus saying, who we are is the definitive lens through which I will judge the worth of everything else.
Precisely. At its absolute mildest, nationalism argues that a specific group of people deserves political self-determination.
Right.
But as that ideological claim hardens, it marches toward a very dark extreme.
Which is
The belief that our people matter more than all others.
our people matter more than all others. Man, that is a chilling sentence.
It really is.
And it perfectly sets the stakes for us. But, I don't want to jump straight to the condemnation just yet.
Fair enough.
Because before we analyze the moral dangers of the gated compound, we really need to understand why human beings are so desperate to build it in the first place.
Yeah, and the research here refuses to dismiss nationalism as just some glitch in human reasoning or a trick played by manipulative politicians.
Right. It works because it answers very real, deeply rooted human needs.
It thrives because it speaks to the fundamental psychology of how human beings survive. I mean, we are not solitary creatures.
Right. We're pack animals, basically.
Exactly. If we look at human evolutionary history, surviving out on the savannah required an in-group. You could not hunt, gather, or protect yourself alone.
So we are hardwired to seek a we.
We absolutely are. Nationalism taps directly into this need for belonging.
And let's ground that belonging in the reality of the listener today.
Yeah, let's do that.
If you are navigating the modern world right now, it is overwhelmingly vast. You might be working for a multinational corporation, buying products shipped from 3 different continents.
Scrolling past tragedies happening 12 time zones away on your phone.
Yes, it is massively globalized, which also makes it incredibly alienating.
Very much so.
You might have thousands of followers online, but you don't even know the last name of the person living next door.
Right.
So when the world feels that chaotic, isn't it entirely logical to crave a larger, sturdy home? I mean, wanting roots, wanting a shared story, isn't a moral failure. It's an anchor.
It is a critical anchor. The modern nation-state offers a ready-made, expansive identity.
How so?
Well, it provides a shared memory, even if it's, partly mythologized, and a shared trajectory for the future. It gives the individual an ongoing narrative to plug into.
I could.
Basically says, you belong here. You are part of this grand historical continuity, and the psychological relief of that is immense.
But it's not just a cozy feeling, right? Because the second core need we uncovered in the sources is strictly utilitarian.
Yes, protection.
Right, protection.
Yeah.
We touched on this with anti-colonialism, but the mechanism goes way deeper.
It does. For a community that feels actively threatened, whether by economic displacement, cultural erasure, or physical violence, nationalism isn't just an aggressive posture.
No, it is a defense mechanism. It is the aggregation of power.
Think about how power works in geopolitics. An isolated individual has literally zero leverage against an empire or against a sweeping global economic trend.
Not at all.
But a unified nation, they can build a wall, raise an army, or enact tariffs.
So for marginalized groups or nations that have historically been conquered and partitioned, nationalism is the shield.
Yes, it is the collective shout of, "We will not be ruled by outsiders. Our history and our dignity matter enough to defend."
Right.
You really cannot fully grasp the persistence of nationalism without understanding its role as a necessary fortress for the vulnerable.
And that directly powers the third need: political motivation and solidarity.
Oh, the solidarity aspect is
Because
huge.
building a functioning society is exhausting, expensive work. Think about the sheer logistical miracle of public infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Building highways, funding massive public school systems, maintaining emergency services, these require incredible amounts of sacrifice.
Right. They require people to voluntarily hand over a portion of their labor in the form of taxes.
Exactly. Why on earth would you be willing to pay for a new hospital wing in a town 4 hours away to treat people you will absolutely never meet?
Well, you only do it if you perceive those strangers as an extension of yourself.
Ah,
You have to believe they belong to your we. This is the engine of civic solidarity. Nationalism mobilizes public effort. It creates this web of mutual responsibility.
so if you didn't have that we,
If you completely dissolved all national identity tomorrow and told everyone they were just abstract citizens of the world, you would likely see a total collapse in the willingness to fund local social safety nets.
really, a total collapse.
Yeah, because the abstraction is too large for the human brain to feel a sense of urgent financial responsibility toward. The nation provides the exact right scale of us to make complex, cooperative society possible.
Okay, I see where that leads, and it's a brilliant mechanism for cooperation.
Yeah.
It gives us an identity, it protects us from being crushed, and it creates the solidarity needed to build schools and roads.
It does all of those things.
But here is the massive problem, and this is where our deep dive pivots into the danger zone.
Yeah, the dark side.
The exact psychological mechanism that creates that beautiful cooperative we is the exact same mechanism that builds a psychological wall.
Absolutely. The moment you define an us, you are mathematically required to define them.
You cannot have an inside without an outside.
You can't. And that boundary is where the moral danger begins to metastasize.
Because the moment you draw that line, you start prioritizing. Let's look at the mechanics of us first.
Okay.
It seems benign when there are plenty of resources, right?
Mhm.
If the global economy is booming, prioritizing your own citizens might just look like healthy competition.
Sure, in times of plenty.
But the world is rarely booming for everyone. What happens to the psychology when things get scarce?
The logic hardens. And it happens quietly. Nationalism explicitly states that our identity deserves special protection and our interests take priority.
Right.
So under pressure, like an economic depression, a pandemic, a geopolitical threat, the logic of our people come first inherently mutates into outsiders matter less.
And that is the fatal moral breach. The second you decide that a human being standing 1 inch outside your geographic border has a lesser inherent value than a human being standing 1 inch inside it.
You have dismantled the entire concept of universal human dignity.
Wow, you really have.
You've created a tiered system of humanity. We call this moral narrowing.
Oral narrowing.
Yes, the circle of who deserves full moral consideration, who deserves empathy, who deserves justice, who deserves life-saving resources, shrinks to perfectly match the legal borders of the state.
Let's ground this in a really uncomfortable thought experiment.
Let's do it.
Think of the ultimate lifeboat scenario.
Right.
Imagine a massive ocean liner sinks.
Yeah.
You are in a lifeboat, and it's filled entirely with your fellow citizens.
Okay.
Nationalism, taken to its logical extreme in a crisis, operates like this. It demands that you ensure everyone in your lifeboat has 3 premium life jackets, a perfectly dry thermal blanket, and a hot cup of coffee
Right.
before you even consider throwing a single frayed rope to the people actively drowning in the freezing water right next to you.
Yeah.
In fact, if throwing that rope makes your lifeboat even slightly less comfortable, nationalism tells you to let them drown.
And importantly, it tells you that letting them drown is the moral choice.
Wait, really? The moral choice.
That is the true danger. It doesn't just result in cruelty, it rebrands cruelty as duty.
Oh, wow.
A nation-centered morality normalizes atrocities that in any other context would horrify us. It leads to the mindset that our prosperity matters more than their survival, or our security justifies whatever happens to them.
Our security justifies whatever happens to them. Man, that is the intellectual foundation for almost every major historical tragedy.
It absolutely is.
If you study history, that is the exact sentence used to justify imperial conquest, the brutalization of refugees, and the launch of devastating wars.
Yes. The moment you convince a population that the others are a threat to the us, empathy is turned off like a light switch.
And that lack of empathy doesn't just project outward across the border, does it? It turns inward, too.
Oh, yes. Because nationalism requires a cohesive we, it eventually forces a very dangerous internal question.
Which is,
Who truly belongs here?
the purity test.
Exactly, the
Yeah.
purity test. Once you establish that belonging grants you a premium status, people start guarding the gates.
Right, they get suspicious.
You start looking around your own society with suspicion. What about the minority groups? What about the recent immigrants?
Really dissenters who disagree with the government.
Yes, or people with mixed heritages. They begin to be viewed not as fellow citizens, but as internal threats to the purity of the national identity.
Wow.
The nation begins to define itself by negation, by aggressively identifying who it excludes.
So it's a constantly shrinking circle. It starts by excluding the foreigner, and it ends by turning on its own neighbors who don't fit the rigid mold.
Exactly.
But wait, I have a problem with treating this entirely like a poisoned well. I'm going to push back on that.
Go for it.
There is a deeply philosophical counter-argument here that we have to address from the sources. Is it truly impossible to balance a partial loyalty with a universal equality?
Okay.
Like, can't I love my people without despising yours?
That is the ultimate philosophical knot. The strongest defense of nationalism rests precisely on the argument that prioritizing your own does not mathematically require you to harm others.
Right. And the foundational metaphor they use to justify this is the family.
Yes, the family analogy. We
Yeah.
brought this up at the very beginning with the burning house,
The argument is incredibly intuitive. I love my children more than I love your children.
which is completely natural.
It's a biological and psychological fact.
Ah.
If there is a scarcity of food, I am feeding my kids first. If there is danger, I am shielding my kids first. And society doesn't view me as a moral monster for that partiality. Society relies on it.
It does.
So if we scale that up, the defenders of nationalism argue that a nation is just a wider family. Strong local loyalty should be perfectly able to coexist with a general respect for the rest of humanity.
Like, I take care of my house, you take care of your house.
Exactly. And we respect each other's property lines.
On paper, it sounds perfectly reasonable. It argues for a localized, manageable moral duty. You cannot practically care for 8 billion people, so you care for your immediate national family and trust others to do the same.
I'm going to rip that analogy apart
Let's do it.
because I think it completely collapses when it meets reality. A family is a small, biologically bounded unit of affection.
Right?
A family does not have a standing military. A family does not have heavily armed border control agents or a central banking system capable of crippling another family's economy through sanctions.
Yeah, they certainly do not.
And a family doesn't have a massive state-funded public education department deliberately writing history textbooks to ensure its children believe their family has never committed a crime.
Yeah, the analogy ignores the entire machinery of the state.
Exactly. You've hit the exact friction point.
The family analogy fails because it completely ignores the reality of scale and state power. This is the monumental difference between private favoritism and nationalism.
Nationalism isn't just an emotion.
No, it is backed by the monopoly on violence. It is backed by armies, by codified laws, by complex propaganda networks, and by the deliberate systemic shaping of collective memory.
Let's drill down into that memory shaping because that is how the moral horizon is truly altered over time. How does a state actually do that?
Okay, let's look at the history textbook example you just mentioned.
Sure.
If a father wants his son to think highly of him, he might exaggerate a story about his youth. It's a minor ego trip.
Right. Totally harmless.
But when a nation wants to maintain its cohesive we, it sanitizes its history. A fifth-grade textbook might completely omit a controversial war of aggression the nation fought 50 years ago.
Or it might reframe a brutal colonization as a civilizing mission.
Yes. By the time those fifth-graders are 30-year-old voters, their entire baseline of reality has been engineered.
Wow.
Their empathy has been deliberately calibrated by the state. They genuinely believe their nation acts only out of benevolence.
Which makes them incredibly susceptible to supporting aggressive policies against outsiders because they have no historical context for their own nation's capacity for cruelty.
Exactly. The scale of the harm is magnified exponentially by the machinery of the state.
So a small bias in your personal life, like buying your kid a nicer bicycle than the neighbor's kid has, is functionally harmless to the structure of world peace.
Right.
But when a nation-state favors its citizens at the expense of others, it hoards life-saving vaccines during a global pandemic, while poorer nations suffer massive casualties.
Or it diverts rivers to water its own crops, causing famines downstream across the border.
State power turns a slight psychological bias into a weapon of mass destruction.
It does. Because the power of the state makes this bias so lethally dangerous, how a state fundamentally defines its people becomes the most important geopolitical factor in the world.
Like who gets to sit inside the lifeboat? Who has their hand on the levers of the state machinery?
Exactly. Which brings us to a massive vital distinction in the research. If nationalism is the vehicle, we have to open the hood and look at the engine.
Because there are two main blueprints for how a nation defines its people.
Yes, we're talking about ethnic nationalism versus civic nationalism.
Let's unpack the dark one first. Ethnic nationalism.
Okay. Ethnic nationalism ties the concept of the nation directly to blood, ancestry, ethnicity, and a mythical cultural purity.
Blood and ancestry.
Yeah. It relies heavily on the concept of soil, the idea that a specific biological lineage has an ancient exclusive claim to a piece of geography.
So it's a biological inheritance model.
Yes. It asks the ugliest question: who really belongs by origin?
Wow.
It asserts that if you do not have the right bloodline or the right ancient history tying you to the region, you can never, ever truly be one of us.
Even if your family has lived there for 3 generations, even if you speak the language perfectly, pay your taxes, and contribute to the society.
Exactly. Under ethnic nationalism, you are permanently an outsider because your genetics don't match the mythical archetype.
Which means ethnic nationalism is inherently and structurally incompatible with universal human respect.
It completely is. Its entire foundation is the belief that humanity is categorically divided into biological hierarchies.
It's a closed loop.
Yes. It is a form of nationalism that most rapidly degenerates into fascism, ethnic cleansing, and violent hostility toward anyone perceived as other.
Because it cannot tolerate difference.
Right, because difference pollutes the myth of the pure bloodline.
So let's contrast that nightmare with the alternative blueprint. Civic nationalism.
Okay.
Our sources define this not by blood, but by shared ideology. It's defined by adherence to laws, institutions, democratic values, and active civic participation.
Yes. Civic nationalism argues that the nation is a political community, an ideological project.
So it says to the world, anyone can belong to this nation, regardless of where they were born, what color their skin is, or who their ancestors were.
Provided they commit to our shared civic principles.
If we use another analogy to make this concrete, ethnic nationalism is basically an incredibly exclusive aristocratic country club.
Oh, good analogy.
Right. If your great-grandparents weren't founding members, you were never getting past the wrought iron gates. No matter how much you love the rules of the club, your blood disqualifies you.
Exactly.
Civic nationalism, on the other hand, is like a massive neighborhood association. Anyone can move into the neighborhood, anyone can join, as long as you agree to the bylaws.
Right. You agree to maintain your property, pay your local dues, and respect your neighbor's rights.
Yes, that analogy perfectly captures the structural difference, I think.
It does. Civic nationalism fundamentally lowers the barrier to entry. It bases belonging on choice, consent, and active participation rather than immutable biological traits.
It focuses on the future we are building together rather than a mythical, pure past.
Because of this, it is far more open to pluralism and diversity. It is, without question, significantly more compatible with respect for humanity than ethnic nationalism.
Okay, I hear that. It is vastly superior.
Way.
I'm looking at the mechanics of this, and I don't think it's a perfect cure.
Really? Why not?
Well, even a neighborhood association draws a hard line. It still creates an inside and an outside.
You are absolutely right to push back on that, and our research highlights exactly this caveat. Civic nationalism is better, but it still possesses the core flaw of the lifeboat mechanism.
Right. It might treat everyone inside the borders with perfect equality. A civic nation might have incredible internal diversity, people of all races and religions living harmoniously under a shared constitution.
Which is fantastic.
It is. But that same perfectly equal, internally diverse society can still turn around, look at the people outside the borders and say, your suffering is entirely irrelevant to us.
Precisely. Civic nationalism can become intensely self-righteous.
Oh, interesting. How so?
It can look at the rest of the world and say, well, we figured out democracy, figured out human rights, so our civic community comes first. If you are struggling over there, it's a failure of your own civic institutions.
Wow. So it helps solve the toxic problem of internal exclusion? but it does absolutely nothing to solve the core tension of global inequality.
Exactly. It doesn't stop the lifeboat from hoarding the life jackets. It just makes sure the people hoarding the life jackets come from diverse
That is
backgrounds.
a phenomenal point. The
Hmm.
boundary still exists, and the state machinery is still exclusively protecting the people inside it.
Yes.
So if even the better version of nationalism carries this massive inherent risk of moral indifference to outsiders,
Yeah.
how do we survive this?
That's the million-dollar question.
We can't abolish nations tomorrow, but how do we prevent the nation from becoming a monster?
The central thesis of the research suggests that for nationalism to truly, genuinely coexist with human respect, it cannot be left to its own devices.
In these rules,
It requires strict, almost exhausting moral guardrails. It must be heavily conditioned. The sources lay out 4 explicit rules of engagement.
4 conditions that a nation must adhere to if it wants to claim it respects humanity.
Well,
Let's tear into these because they strike me as incredibly demanding.
they are very demanding.
Condition number 1. The nation cannot be supreme. The exact phrasing we found is that the nation must be viewed as important but not sacred.
Yes. This attacks the very idolization of the state. It argues that there are universal principles, truth, justice, basic human dignity that must always sit higher in the hierarchy of values than national pride or national interest.
So the nation is just a tool.
Right. The nation is merely a tool, a political vessel designed to promote human flourishing. The moment a nation becomes a god to be worshipped, the moment it demands unquestioning obedience, it turns toxic.
Practically, that means when national success conflicts with fundamental justice, justice has to win.
Exactly.
Like if a nation can only secure an economic advantage by utilizing slave labor in another country and it chooses the economic advantage, it has made the nation supreme over human dignity.
It has failed the first test.
Exactly. Which flows directly into condition 2. Outsiders must remain fully human in the eyes of the state. There can be no blank checks issued in the name of national interest.
This rejects the idea that the ends justify the means on the global stage.
Right, we established that prioritizing your political community is a natural function of the state. But condition 2 says that this prioritization has a hard limit. You cannot dehumanize the non-citizen.
Let's use a geopolitical scenario to illustrate this mechanism.
Right.
Imagine 2 nations share a massive river.
Okay, nation A and nation B.
Right. Nation A is upstream. Nation B is downstream. Nation A wants to build a colossal dam to generate cheap electricity and trigger a manufacturing boom for its citizens.
Which is in their national interest.
Absolutely. But doing so will completely destroy the agriculture of Nation B, plunging millions into famine.
Wow!
Nationalism without guardrails says, build the dam, our citizens come first.
Right.
But nationalism constrained by condition 2 says, we must find a different way to generate power, or we must negotiate a water-sharing treaty because we do not have the right to secure our prosperity by actively starving millions of people.
It forces the nation to recognize the equal inherent worth of the people downstream. It demands that empathy doesn't stop at the border checkpoint.
Yes.
Which brings us to condition 3. And I have to say, looking at human psychology, this might be the most difficult condition to actually practice.
Oh, without a doubt.
Condition 3 is that self-criticism must be possible. It demands that loyalty to the nation includes a commitment to the truth, even when the truth is ugly. A nation must allow its people to say, our nation has done wrong.
We touched on this with the history textbooks, but let's look at the active mechanics of national accountability.
It's so hard.
Think about how difficult it is for an individual to admit they were deeply morally wrong. It triggers intense cognitive dissonance.
Right. Now multiply that psychological resistance by a population of 100 million people, backed by a political establishment whose power relies on projecting strength and righteousness.
It's nearly impossible. Global politics is a theater of projecting invulnerability. Showing weakness is seen as an invitation for attack.
So it is entirely counterintuitive to the mechanics of state power.
But the argument here is that without this capacity for institutional self-correction, nationalism becomes a form of moral blindness.
Right. If questioning the past or questioning current foreign policy is treated as an act of treason, then the nation has abandoned its pursuit of truth in favor of protecting a fragile collective ego.
Loyalty includes truth. If you actually love your country, you want it to be just. You don't want it to simply appear just while committing atrocities in the dark.
A morally serious nationalism demands that citizens hold their own government's feet to the fire. It means protesting your own military when it crosses the line.
Yes, and rewriting the textbooks to include the dark chapters, because an informed, morally mature citizenry is actually stronger than a brainwashed one.
But it requires massive societal discipline to prioritize truth over the comforting myth of national perfection.
If a nation cannot tolerate internal criticism, it will inevitably become tyrannical to its own people and aggressive toward its neighbors.
And that leads to the fourth and final condition for compatibility.
Ah,
Shared global duties must be accepted. The
yes.
nation must acknowledge that it possesses responsibilities that cross borders.
Because the fantasy of the totally isolated sovereign nation is dead. We do not live in hermetically sealed bubbles.
Not at all.
The modern world is characterized by overlapping, cascading consequences. The carbon emissions pumped into the atmosphere by an industrialized nation in the northern hemisphere directly dictate the sea levels threatening to drown an island nation in the southern hemisphere.
Or an economic collapse in one region triggers a massive refugee crisis that crashes onto the shores of another.
Right.
A viral outbreak in one city can shut down the entire planet in a matter of weeks. The argument here is that a nationalism that pretends its actions don't impact the rest of the globe isn't just selfish, it is functionally delusional.
To claim compatibility with humanity, a nation must actively participate in mitigating the harms of a connected world.
So what does that look like in practice?
That means accepting responsibility for climate agreements, ensuring fair trade practices that don't perpetually impoverish developing nations.
Providing baseline refugee protection.
Exactly. And participating in the opposition to war crimes, even when intervening offers no immediate economic benefit to the state. Rejecting all shared global responsibility is fundamentally a rejection of humanity.
Wow. Okay, so we've traveled through the evolutionary psychology of belonging, the terrifying slide into the lifeboat mentality, the vast difference between private favoritism and state machinery, the blueprints of civic versus ethnic identity, and finally, this incredibly demanding list of moral guardrails.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. So it is time to synthesize all of this. What does it all mean for us? We have to deliver an honest verdict based on this deep dive,
Okay, let's do it.
based on all the mechanisms we've explored.
Yeah.
Is nationalism compatible with respect for all humanity?
The most honest synthesis of all our sources offers a conclusion that is deeply nuanced and perhaps deeply unsettling.
Okay, give it to us.
The verdict is this. Nationalism is compatible with respect for humanity in theory, but it is morally unstable and extraordinarily dangerous in practice.
Wow. So it's like trying to balance a heavy bowling ball on the tip of a pencil.
Ha! Yeah, that's exactly it.
You can theoretically find the perfect center of gravity, but
Yeah.
the slightest breeze, like the slightest economic panic or geopolitical threat, and the entire thing comes crashing down.
That is exactly the dynamic. In theory, you can construct a meticulously restrained civic nationalism.
Right, you can build a society that says, we care especially for our shared political home. We fund our local schools, and we celebrate our civic values, but we actively refuse to deny the dignity of those outside our borders.
You can codify the four conditions?
But in practice, gravity always wins.
In practice, the psychological wiring of human nature, combined with the immense, intoxicating power of the state, exerts a tremendous gravitational pull toward the dark side.
It really does.
Nationalism has a terrifying historical tendency to slide towards superiority, historical self-flattery, and selective compassion. The default setting of state power is self-interest, not universal justice.
So what is the takeaway for the listener? How do you, the person trying to make sense of your own identity and your own political beliefs, navigate this?
It's tough.
I think the most vital phrase we can extract from this entire exploration is the concept of the moral horizon.
The moral horizon.
Yes, the nation can be one important circle of loyalty in your life. It can be a source of community and civic action, but it must never, ever become your final moral horizon.
That is the crux of the entire philosophical challenge. A morally mature individual can deeply love their nation.
Right.
You can work tirelessly for its improvement, you can celebrate its cultural triumphs, and you can defend its democratic institutions. But you have to do so while holding two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time.
Which are?
You must maintain the local loyalty while constantly remembering that every political border on a map is a man-made fiction.
Yeah.
And every one of those borders stands inside a much larger overriding truth. The people standing on the other side of the invisible line are persons too, with the exact same inherent worth as you.
That is the massive aha moment. realizing that truly loving your people doesn't mathematically require you to view other populations as lesser.
Exactly.
But at the exact same time, you have to possess the self-awareness to recognize how dangerously easy it is for human psychology to slip into that exact trap.
Nationalism only works when it is constantly humbled.
Yes, it has to be actively, aggressively corrected by a universal moral concern every single day, or the lifeboat mentality takes over.
It requires a level of constant, exhausting civic vigilance. It requires citizens who are willing to be the friction against the state's natural tendency to prioritize itself at the expense of the world.
It does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought.
Something to process on your own time, long after this audio stops playing.
We want to build on the reflection questions from our research. Ask yourself this and be brutally honest. Does your specific national identity make your moral circle larger, or does it make it smaller?
That's a great question.
When push comes to shove, at what exact point does your devotion to your nation begin to compete with your devotion to the truth?
And let's push that even further. Imagine a shift in our psychological habits.
Okay, I'm imagining.
Imagine a world where every single time we felt a surge of pride for our own nation's accomplishments, a scientific breakthrough, a beautiful piece of art, a diplomatic victory, we simultaneously challenged ourselves to recognize a specific, equal contribution to humanity from a nation we have been conditioned to consider a rival.
Oh, wow. That fundamentally alters the wiring.
It breaks the loop of superiority. If every time we felt the warmth of cheering for the home team, we actively, deliberately acknowledged the brilliance and humanity of the visitors, would those man-made borders feel different?
They absolutely would.
Would the machinery of the state have a harder time convincing us that the people downstream don't matter?
That completely changes the diagnostic landscape.
Yeah.
We are no longer just looking at the murky waters of human psychology. We are actively taking responsibility for how we navigate them.
Yes, we are.
We are deciding exactly what kind of rules we are going to enforce in the lifeboat. Something to think about.